fish and wildlife management area. I guess already things aren't going to work. Just check. Oh, you have to use it. Okay. Okay. My first exposure to the Buffalo Creek drainage and some of the habitats that we find there was back in about 1991 when I was asked by our Division of Water to assist with a inventory of fish and wildlife habitats along the Buffalo Creek watershed, especially those areas closer to Buffalo. And one of the results was the production of a map of floodplain forests. And we had a number of floodplain forests that were identified. Actually 35 were identified along the watershed pretty much to the west of Route 78 or Transit Road. Jim, do you have that pointer? Thank you. Okay, this is pretty much the location of Transit Road. As you can see, Cazenovia Creek shows here Buffalo Creek and Cayuga, which are part of the Buffalo River system or watershed. And the Lydecker Road area is pretty much right in here. And this hatched area here, as well as this one, is an example of the floodplain forests that are found there. There's some other floodplain forests as you get closer to Buffalo. When we did the inventory, one thing we noticed that as we progressed outward from the city, we found better quality floodplain forest and a more diversity of different wildlife species as we progressed, further away from the urban area. So this being one of the outer areas, as well as some of these others near Transit Road, we found a pretty good diversity of fish and wildlife, and thus their importance ecologically increased. So what's being done elsewhere in terms of protection of stream corridors? Have an interest in what's been done in Ohio. I think they have some really good examples of the use of stream corridors to provide both protection for fish and wildlife resources as well as providing recreation. And this shows the Cleveland metro parks. And as you can see, their metro parks tend to be linear, and that's because they're protecting stream corridors along the urban area. So we have both the Cleveland metro parks, we also have some in adjacent counties. Here's an example of a close-up map of one of the metro parks in, I guess this is Lorain County. Notice how the metro park is pretty much designed to incorporate the streams. These areas tend to be in size pretty much within the landscape, so they're pretty much forested and they've been protected from development. So there's one example of a linear park that does provide protection. Here's a second example, a little bit further west of Vermilion. Again, the park has been set up either side of the stream corridor and encompasses floodplain forest as well as some recreational facilities. Okay, so what type of wildlife would we encounter if we did visit one of these stream corridors? I'm going to show you some examples of wildlife that we know or believe exists within the Cazenovia Creek area, as well as Buffalo Creek and Cayuga Creek. And one is the common mud puppy. This is an obligate inhabitant of our local streams. They tend to live under big rocks, and they're really an interesting part of the wildlife component of our streams. So this would be, as fish and freshwater mussel, this would be a representative of species that are really utilizing pretty much just the stream for their habitat. We also have other types of wildlife, that, such as wood turtles, that although they use the streams for wintering, they actually pretty much winter on the bottom of the stream. But in late spring or summer, they utilize the floodplain forest. They also move out into adjacent fields and forests. And if you take a look at the mapped habitat of an individual turtle, what you find is that they tend to have linear home ranges which follow the stream courses. This is an individual which we call Gramps, and a kernel home range map is essentially a map that's been developed through telemetry observations of that individual. And you can see here's this dark lines in this area pretty much show the streams. Gramps had a part of his territory followed this stream course. He also went up this smaller stream and also utilized this stream. So we get some wildlife that tend to use not just the stream, but the lands which are fairly close to that water course. We have a New York State endangered species, which is in the Buffalo River watershed. It remains, we know, in the Buffalo Creek watershed, and it has been found historically in Cazenovia Creek. So this is a species which we still may have here in Cazenovia Creek. And this species tends to use not just the stream, it feeds on crayfish, but it also tends to climb up on shrubs along the stream banks and use those habitats also.
Great.
This is a look at what used to be farm field, according to Jim. And today, it's really hard to believe that this is originally farmed. We have what we call a floodplain forest that's vegetated with cottonwoods, possibly silver maple. And you notice that, unlike a park, we actually have a forest here because we have more than just trees. We have several layers. We have a canopy layer, which that's pretty much the upper layer of the forest. We have shrub layer showing up, and then herb layer, and there also would be a duff layer below the herb. So we have more than just trees. We actually have habitat for wildlife here. We also have not just floodplain forests, but there is a very beautiful wooded gorge. First time I saw this area, we were flying beaver surveys out of Buffalo Air Park, and we crossed Cazenovia Creek, and I looked down, and it was in the fall, and The oaks, you know, as the picture shows, were in color, and it really was a nice, attractive gorge. And that was the first time I saw this from the air. And I thought, boy, this is something that we'd like to see preserved.
Where is this picture, do you know?
This was taken actually from the mental health property, from the Children's Psychiatric Center property. And it would be looking upstream. You can notice there is a little waterfall. I don't know if people are aware of that, but there is right here. It's a really nice, attractive waterfall that comes out of the developmental property. This is the source of the waterfall, small stream that we have there before it goes over the gorge edge. Notice the diversity of trees. We have beech trees, oak trees, a really nice, interesting forest. And again, it's not a park. It has the structure of a forest with canopy, shrub layer, and all the components of a forest that would have a diversity of both plants as well as wildlife. We have some big trees on the property. Here's an oak that's probably nearly 4 feet in diameter. That's a pretty old tree. Some more of the big oaks. This is a view looking from the Developmental Center property, looking into the gorge. So we're kind of looking over the treetops of some of the floodplain forest. Now here is a road. I'm not sure if this is the road that you mentioned, Jim. You can see some guardrails. So this is Old Shep Road. You can see there's some old guardrails, and part of the road has started to slip here into the gorge. But that might have some potential as a future nature trail. There is a pretty precipitous, edge from the Developmental Center property into the gorge. Is probably maybe 40, 50 feet in height. That would be one concern with management of the property, is the risk of fall into the gorge. Okay, one of the interests we have in the property is access for fishing. And the main sport fishing opportunity here in Cazenovia Creek is for steelhead. We currently don't have any state DEC-owned property on Cazenovia Creek for fishing access. This would be a first. And with DEC ownership of this portion of the property would secure access to nearly 2 miles of the stream for public fishing. This is a picture of a steelhead from Cazenovia Creek. Steelhead run in Cazenovia Creek begins in late November and it continues during the winter and peaks in early spring. I just found this out recently that beginning in 2003, DEC has stocked 10,000 steelhead fingerlings each spring at East Aurora, which would be upstream, in hopes of establishing a good run of steelhead. And at this point, it seems that this stocking should result in a really good run that should continue to grow in the future. It's just a picture of the existing parking lot at Lydecker Road. It's quite a nice facility. One of the ways of managing this would be to enter into a cooperative agreement with the town for the town to do maintenance on the parking lot, as they've already done. Okay, this is a map of what we have proposed for the transfer. The area within black, and it's pretty much the natural areas of the property are what we have proposed for transfer. There have been some exceptions for important properties that would still be held by the Developmental Center along Lydecker Road. We also would be incorporating the forested areas in the gorge area that are part of the present psychiatric center here. All total, 113.2 acres of total land transfer. Again, here's another piece of forested area which abuts town property here. And proposed objectives. The first objective is to protect the ecological integrity of the stream corridor and adjacent woodlands. The second goal would be to preserve public access for both passive wildlife recreation and fishing. Now, by passive, I mean things like nature trails, bird observation, that type of non-take recreation. And it also would allow for preserving the integrity of the property by allowing some access for treatment of invasive plants. There's two species, Japanese knotweed and Phragmites, that can really devastate these floodplain forests. And by continued state ownership, there would be the ability of the state to go in and try to do some control of those invasives.
What is wrong with those invasives? What do they do?
Okay, they're so aggressive that what happens, for instance, Japanese knotweed will come into the understory of that floodplain forest that we saw in an earlier photo and completely dominate and shade out the other native plants until you get pretty much a monotypic stand of Japanese knotweed. And Phragmites is very similar. It'll do pretty much the same thing. It just eliminates the native vegetation. Well, that's all I have. Is there any questions for me at this time?
Yeah, about vegetation, I understand that deer are pretty destructive toward vegetation. They don't allow small trees to grow large. Is that? I'm wondering if these invasive species might be a protection against that, or not. Have you considered that? I mean, would deer be a problem here? I understand that deer are a problem because they eat everything that might grow into large trees before they get big.
Well, we have a similar problem, and a good example of that at Tiff Preserve right now. They're eating the shrubs, they're eating the regenerating trees, and there's so many deer there that they're suppressing that type of growth. That could happen here if, with big numbers of deer, they'll not only eat the trees, but they'll eat the shrubs, and they'll diminish the value of the habitat for other wildlife. Another question?
Yes, I can tell you.
Yes.
There is a big population of deer over in the Developmental Center.
There already is.
Oh, there is.
How's your tongue?
I was through there last night and counted over 40. And I got 6 or 8 every night in my backyard. I had them on my front porch. They're eating everything in sight, even deer-proof plants that you put in. And what's going to happen to all these deer if you're only taking a portion of the land? What if some developer wants to come in and put 300-400 houses in there? Where are these deer going to go?
Well, they're going to use the remaining lands. And, unless some are taken out.
There won't be enough remaining lands to support them. There isn't now. They're all in the yards. I live 200 yards from the western edge of the developmental site. And they walk down the sidewalk, they walk down the street at night. And there's my neighbor, he can tell you too.
Yeah.
He lives closer than I do.
Well, this is a common problem in the Buffalo area. We have some of the municipalities that are doing deer control. They're using bait and shoot methods to take out some of the deer population. And really that's what we have at this point to control deer numbers. This area isn't open to the means which we usually harvest deer through our shotgun hunting or archery. So the answer has been, in the urban areas to use bait and shoot for removal. At some point, that's probably going to have to be done. Yes?
Who decides bait and shoot is used in your town?
That's usually the town board. Okay, this lady at the second table?
Who does the shooting? Who takes, shoots the deer?
Well, it's usually been, members of the police force in the municipalities. That's what's been used in other areas. In the back, please.
The bulk of the property you're looking to take title to couldn't be developed anyway. The building lots would be put on tax rolls, most of it's floodplain.
Yeah, we already have some, the DEC has an easement because of the ice structures, that were placed for flood control. So we have a flooding easement in much of that property already, down in the gorge. The area on top of the bank, some of the forested area could be developed for housing. We'd like to see it stay as forest. The problem is if you didn't get the wooded gorge protected, what we've seen elsewhere along waterfront property, along streams or escarpments, as soon as people purchase the property and put in a home, they want to clear the trees for a view of the creek or the gorge. And as a result, the trees are removed and you don't have a forest. In the back, yes?
The property now, is it primarily privately held, or is it the state that owns this land along the creek bed?
This is all state property. So essentially what we have asked is that the Dormitory Authority transfer the wooded portions to DEC for management. Yes?
Has that decision been made? Because I see that it's all have been surveyed already. So has the decision been made?
It's not finalized, but we have, a survey has been completed. They're doing some things to update the survey of those lines. But we're not to a point where it's finalized. But, the survey is nearly complete at this point. We've had, there's been good interest on the part of the former agencies the agencies that presently hold the property in cooperating with us for, preservation. I think the folks that have the property now would like to see it preserved, at least those natural areas. Yes, sir.
What other agencies have some ownership of that entire parcel
The other agencies?
you mentioned?
I think it's the Office of Mental Health and the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, 2 offices. I think they may both be in the Department of Mental Health. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just wondering, upstream from this land, is there any outflow that contains polluted water? And if so, is the DEC doing anything to control that?
You know, I really, as being a wildlife biologist, I don't think I can answer that. I'm not aware of any serious pollution. You know, we've been cleaning up pollution in the Buffalo area and the Niagara River, but I haven't heard of anything significant upstream. You know, we consider it as a good fishery. Yes, ma'am.
If you acquire all this property, is the property that you already have as easement for the floodplain, is that going to be included in the area that the people can fish?
Well, presently there is some fishing going on because it's state-owned property. People aren't being asked to leave. And yes, with the property being transferred to DEC, the fishing access would essentially remain the same or be expanded, as well as access for other nature trails and that type of use of the property.
The easement area would be included for nature trails?
For access, could be, yes. We just wouldn't want to have any structures developed there. Anyone else?
I have a
In the
question.
very back of the room, sir?
Yeah, could you repeat the questions, because it's hard to hear what people are asking.
He wants you to repeat the question when you answer.
Repeat the questions that
Okay.
people are asking.
Do you want to state your question for them?
I asked if the properties that are along Cazenovia Creek already that are part of the easement for the floodplain, if they would then be included in the area that would be open to the public for fishing and nature trails. And his answer was yes.
Were you able to hear that? So the state easement section is going to be open for fishing and access, as well as any lands that would be transferred. For most of it, it's the same land. Yes, ma'am.
Same question, not as his, but access. Can we now personally go to these streams and walk them without any concern that a private owner is going to come out and say you're trespassing? Just a part of it.
Well, there is private ownership on the north side of the stream, so you wouldn't have the right to access on that side. On the south side, it is publicly owned. I'm not sure what the history, has been. There is a parking lot that's been developed. Maybe Evelyn can state
Yeah,
what access
I'll
has
speak to
been.
that.
Okay, what I hear some of you wondering is if you own property on the other side of the creek, are these walking trails going to be in your backyard? And the answer is, I believe, no. Even if the state has an easement on that side of the creek, that will not be part of what people are just allowed to go back and forth. That's my understanding. Private land is private land. The state will own the state owns currently and hopefully will transfer to the DEC from the top of the escarpment, according to the map that Ken had, to the middle of the creek. Is that correct? The property boundaries, the middle of the creek?
Yes.
On either side. So on the north side of the creek, Lisa, you own to the middle of the creek. The state owns to the middle of the creek, and that's where your properties meet. I believe what Ken's talking about is 2 miles, a little bit upstream, and then almost to the flood control devices downstream. I don't know if they're showing it. Okay. And the West Seneca Environmental Commission did work with the town of West Seneca to develop that little parking access site that's there. It was actually a public safety hazard to have people park on Lydecker Road at that curve where cars were coming and going and people were walking across. So along with this highway superintendent, we worked on getting that accomplished.
Okay, I'm going to try to speak without the microphone. Can everybody hear? Okay.
Sounds good.
This is pretty much where the property line is in this area. You can see all the private properties that back up from the north side to the middle of the creek. DEC apparently does have some flooding easement down in here on private lands. So there would be nothing, through the land transfer, there would be no incursion onto those private lands for nature trails or whatever. Although there's a flooding easement, we wouldn't be, taking over those lands for access by the public. That would still, these would still remain private. And I could see why you folks would be concerned about that. We're not intruding onto private lands with any planned public access development. Okay? Yes, sir.
So the access to the lands on the development side, it looks like there would only be access down by the bridge area. Is there plans that if somebody buys that to purchase access or get some type of access?
That's what we have to answer. That's up to the citizens and the residents. Right now the zoning is what it is. If the zoning changes, if the people in the town of West Seneca determine that we have a better idea and we want something else to happen there, we actually do have a lot of say in what goes on. This is a starting point where we are right now for the future. When Doug, I'll get to you in 1 sec. When Ken was talking about the invasive species, that Japanese knotweed along Cazenovia Creek, it's so prevalent and it's really choking out a lot of habitat. So a lot of the animals that Ken was talking about that live down in those creek corridors, a lot of their habitat is being taken away. And the deer, to my knowledge, can't eat enough Japanese knotweed to eradicate it. If you go down by the West Seneca bus garage by West Senior in the fall, in the late summer and fall, all that huge greenery that's right along that creek bank to the right when you're driving, say, toward Orchard Park Road and Ridge Road, say from the 400, all that vegetation that goes up on the power lines and is everywhere, that's that knotweed, and nothing else will grow there. And eventually what happens, and what has happened even along this section to some extent, is there's a bit of a destabilization of the stream bank. And there's a lot of ice curve that occurs. You're familiar with that, I'm sure. And so there's a problem with knotweed even on this parcel that's been identified. The Phragmites is a little different. That's that real tall feathery thing that you see, kind of looks real pretty and blows around, and that essentially does the same thing. Red-winged blackbirds really like to live in Phragmites, but other than that, I don't know of much else.
Not in this country. I just want to mention that the access question is a good one. Again, the forested land that we hope to have transferred does butt up to the town property here. And then, of course, the other end is over here. So if you wanted to have any type of continuous trail, you might want to think about some other access points, to get to the property. Because presently, the access would be from Lydecker Road if the remainder was developed.
That is something that the West Seneca Environmental Commission talks about a lot, is access, creek access, public access, and land use in the town. Doug, I'm sorry, you had a question?
This is something of a bigger picture question. If your proposal for transfer of those natural portions of the land to the DEC for management is successful, can you ballpark approximately what percentage of the total package that would that take off the table? How much land is there still yet to be determined the use of?
I know the answer to that. It's the entire parcel is, I think, 439 acres. The state Office of Mental Health is going to retain 71 acres for the psych hospital that's going to stay there, that's functioning, that's going to remain. If the DEC takes 130 113 acres, that roughly leaves a little more than half of the site that will be available for sale and development. And it's the area that you see with most of the buildings on it. I know when John Gullo and Rick Henry come to talk to us next time, they're going to talk about those buildings. They're going to talk about remediation of those buildings, what it's going to take, and what can possibly be done on the site with the current zoning, and then some opportunities. Margaret Worcester from Riverkeeper had a comment.
Thank you. Actually, it's a kind of question for Ken still. You know, going back to that second map that you showed with the floodplain forests and how small they look, there's not a whole lot of floodplain forest left in this river system. And so, you know, it's probably less than 10% or 1% of acreage along the river system, the lower Buffalo River system. Was there ever, so, you know, so we're talking about a very small piece remaining here that's going to be protected, which is good, but was there ever any discussion about more of the property, even the whole property being protected as a wildlife habitat or as a preserve?
Okay, Margaret asked if there was ever any consideration to preserving the entire parcel. Roughly, that's what she asked.
That's roughly what I asked.
We tried to address those areas which we thought had the most biological diversity and concentrated, as you can see, on the forested areas, assuming that those would have invertebrates that would be valuable for the whole watershed. We felt that the state really wanted to have development of the remaining part of the property, so we didn't propose that.